I suppose the question is, are we ready for this future? Okay. For many years, finance has been under pressure around what we call the belt tightening. Okay. For those of you who worked in finance functions, say for the last 10, 15 years, there's been this mantra of do more with less. I believe we passed that age today. Today it's about finance in the digital future and that digital fit CFO. Right? It's a very different sort of breed that we probably need to think about around how future relevance. So I'm going to spend the next sort of 40 minutes with you just to talk about where finance has come from, where it's going, and also some of the how-to. Often, it's great, you talk about where finance is going, but people say, well, how do I get there? What do I do? So I'll share some of that with you. You'll see you've also got a little placemat with you, and a little bit later on, we're going to go through just a couple of questions. I don't expect you to hand these back in. It's just for your own consumption, where you can kind of gauge or test where you feel you are from a finance individual or a finance function perspective. I'll share that a bit later on. So I thought I'd start off with this, and this is certainly not a lecture in digital, okay? But I often struggle with the word digital and IT and so on, and what does it actually really mean? So for those of you who love to search on Dr. Watson and Google, you'll find typically this kind of a description of what digital actually is. And they talk about things like digital literacy, fluency, citizenship. These are all things that might be concepts that are unfamiliar to some of us or might be very familiar to many of us. Okay? So that's quite interesting. It talks about tools, digital devices, and so on. And we think about all these things today are the tools that we actually use in finance. Okay? So that's just a bit of background to what does digital really mean from a technology perspective. Digital transformation, okay? So I've tried to distill it in my small mind as to what really means for me, and hopefully this is something that resonates with you. So I put digital down to this. It's the impact of digital today, right? Pervasive ability to connect, share, and interact with, and leverage information at speed to drive behavior and influence an outcome. Does that kind of make sense? So as finance, we are at the heart of the organization when it comes to information. And I often ask a finance function, who owns your data, as an example? And the answer I generally get is IT. Are there any IT people in the room? No. Are we only finance people in the room? Cool, so we can sort of poke holes at IT, right? Okay, so when they say that, I kind of hold my chest a bit and I walk out. And I say, it's not my age, don't worry, it's just I'm panicking for you. Because if you believe IT owns your data, you've actually got a problem. Finance actually owns the data. IT provides the environment in which for you to actually interact with the data. Very, very different. Okay. So that's in my small mind, as I call it, the way I look at information, the way I look at digital. And today the finance function has been impacted significantly by the rate at which information is pervasive and the speed with digital enhancement. Digital is not new. It's been around for 20 years odd. We've talked about it, right? From when we moved from analog. But again, it's about how this is going to influence the modern finance function. So my talk today is around the modern finance function and the finance function of the future, and whether we are actually ready and able to actually adopt that. So we all know this. The demands of the finance function are instrumental. CEOs, boards, shareholders are asking and putting a lot of pressure on finance to be better, faster, smarter. Okay? Please don't tell me what's already happened in the business. Because in fact, the market's already told me what's happened in the business. In fact, I don't need to employ you to tell me that. The market tells me that. Please tell me what's coming through the tunnel that I'm actually not yet aware of. How can you make sure that I'm agile and fit? Make sure that I've got a sustainable business going forward into the future. Okay. So that's generally the pressure that finance is always under. Besides the last 10 years, please tighten your belt and do more with less. So the age of finance today is actually very, very exciting. When we talked about 2,500 finance functions on an annual basis across the globe, it's amazing how many finance professionals today are so excited. It's interesting. And you say, against the backdrop of all this change, and the guys are going, yes, because we can actually do something different. We can actually do the things that we've always wanted to do that we've never had the tools to actually do it with. So here's a quick anecdotal of the day of the life of a CFO in the not too distant future. And for those of you who don't have strong eyesight, you're welcome to come to the front. I do see these screens are a little small, and so we are happy to obviously share these presentations. But I'll read it out for you. So I call it While You Sleep. So imagine the world when finance transactional level is happening while you sleep. Imagine this day. This is just a quick example. So between 3 and 3:30 in the morning, you've actually got automation, robots, AI, and so on running in the background in your business. When you wake up, because finance people wake up early in the morning, right? This is what we'll do. This is what we see. So this is the day in the life of a future CFO. Think about this. And I've put some interesting concepts up there in bold and in red. Hopefully you're not colorblind, so you can see the red. Okay? And I call this while you play. So whilst you're sipping on your cappuccino in the morning or whatever it is that takes your fancy, guess what? That's already what's happening. By the time you get to the office and you interact with the business for the rest of the day, you're free. Okay? Now, unfortunately, too many people don't see finance. That's why they always call us the beanies in the back corner, right? And actually, you know what? We're quite happy to outsource you because you don't really add a whole lot of value. This is the CFO and the finance function of the future. So the question is, what do you do for the other 8 hours a day? Okay, it's not about how do I keep myself out of jail, right? So for too often, finance functions generally are focused on how do I stay out of jail. And when I talk to CFOs today, I always give them two things. I say it's a double-sided coin. One side is, how do I make sure there aren't bars in front of my face? And once I've got that sorted out, how do I make sure I stay relevant in the business? And to me, how do I stay relevant in the business is a whole lot more exciting as opposed to how do I stay out of jail. Unfortunately, too many finance functions are sitting on this side and making sure we stay out of jail, right? Around the compliance, because we've got a lot of manual controls and so on, and immature areas of functionality. So that's the day in the life, anecdotally, of a future CFO. Now, if we could all aspire to something like that, man, to me that is great. That's awesome. Imagine when you're interacting with a Siri for the CFO as an example, through voice recognition, on a device, sitting on the beach, sipping your pina coladas, right? And you're running this business. Can you imagine that? Imagine that day. Is it impossible? Who would say it's impossible? It's not impossible. We are the people that can actually make it happen. We're the people that actually make that change. Okay, so it's not someone doing it to us, we're doing it for ourselves. All right. So we talk about a finance of the future, and you'll see in the bit of the tail to today's discussion was Grant's going to tell us a little bit about the finance personas and the new finance function and what we can expect. The first thing we need to remind ourselves is finance will stay core, of course, but the things we do will be slightly different. So we talk about navigation, remediation, connectivity, and resilience. Those will be the new concepts of finance. Think about that in an economy where it is so diverse, so agile, okay, and actually to a degree, a bit schizophrenic, right? All of a sudden, we can't stay in our old mindsets. So we have this provocation, if you want to call that, of the new terms that we'll be using in finance in the very near future. And this will cause a very significant shift up that value curve. For any of you who have ever seen the sort of 4-quadrant model of where finance sits, okay, between scorekeeper, commentator, diligent caretaker, or somewhere up in the business partner sort of quadrant, and everyone obviously aspires to be there, okay? That's what's going to get us up that side. So no longer will be about the scorekeeper, the diligent caretaker, and the bean counter sort of thing. It's going to be how do I navigate this uncertain future? So these are the concepts we need to start to think of from a navigation perspective, and I know you won't be able to read all of this, okay? So steering the enterprise to success. How can we make sure we steer this enterprise to a successful, sustainable future in a paradigm of unknown? Many of the businesses we work in today have no future reference point. Think about that. And the finance intelligence that we have in our organizations are what we need to be able to use to be able to help navigate what that uncertain future looks like. So we talk about real-time forecasts will be made possible via the use of emerging technologies. We've heard about that for a couple of years. Budgeting, rolling forecasts, as we know, it will cease to exist. Today, the budget process, for those of you who does budgets, is it fun? Yes. Who said yes? No. Do you enjoy doing budgeting? Okay. What do you enjoy about it?
Because with the production as well, so if you understand the business and you're bringing in your accounting expertise together and you are able to communicate operational
Sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. Yep. Okay. All of a sudden you got a mic in front of you. That's fine. Okay, so, all right, I got that. So here's someone who's very excited about budgeting, and I think what I got from you there is because finance is actually interacting with the business.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, awesome. How long does it take to do your budget? Long. So the answer here was long. Is it painful? How many iterations? Okay, I'm going to ask some rhetorical questions. How many iterations do you go through?
Look, it's long, it's painful, but it's
Long,
fulfilling.
painful.
Fulfilling.
It's fulfilling.
Yes.
Okay. All right. There's someone who obviously likes the numbers. I hate budgeting personally. All right. So generally when we look at the budgeting process, right, it's long, it's painful, highly expensive. We actually don't even measure what that process actually costs us. Okay. Whilst we've got our heads down doing budgeting, we've actually forgotten about the rest of the organization. Typically, the average budget cycle is 6 months. Goes through 5 to 6 iterations. The day you publish it, it's wrong. It's outdated. So no one trusts the budget anyway. So why do we do it? Makes us feel comfortable, I suppose. I don't know. Okay. Sure. No, of course. Definitely. But again, the way we budget, the way we forecast will certainly change. Okay. How many of us today go last year plus? How many of us go zero-based budgeting? How many of us use driver-based budgeting? Different budgeting techniques, different technologies as an example. Okay, so these are some of the things that will be changing that will actually will continue to pull finance out of what we call the back office and put us more front office. Unfortunately today, when we look at finance functions, the first thing I ask, we do a bit of an analysis of where people spend their time, okay, across 12 dimensions of finance. And I'll show that up in a moment or two. The answer to that is finance isn't at work for 25 days of the month. So what does finance do for 25 days of the month? That's actually what the business is. Because I don't see finance. I only see you when you give me a report. And generally it's something that's sitting in Excel or something that's kind of, not quite sure which version it is. Sometimes it's very thick. Sometimes we've got to change some pages just as we give it to the board or whatever it might be. So that unfortunately our customer of finance goes, well, where are you guys in my business? 25 days a month, do you actually even pitch up? I see you 5 days a month, sure. Typically at month end or period end or year end, right? Okay. So that's a little bit about how finance in future will actually be navigating, and also understanding the stress factors of future shock and how quickly we can actually bounce back from that in a paradigm of no reference point. So that's navigation. Let me talk about resilience. Again, often finance functions are very good at looking at the past. We're great at that. Okay, review mirror accounting as I call it. We're awesome at that. How do we actually look forward and make sure that we actually build a resilient organization? This is what the organization, this is what our shareholders, our CEOs are asking of that CFO. Please sit at my right hand of my table. Okay, don't only pitch up when I have a strat session. So this we talk about finance's role in creating more resilience and again, enabled to bounce back from shocks. Statistical models, dashboard reporting. So often we ask finance today, how often do you have visualization, reporting dashboards, stress testing models, depending on the type of industry that you're in? Some industries are obviously a lot more akin to significant shock and require a lot more agility. And generally the answer back to us is when we ask that question is, well, we've got some ERP reporting, we might have some software plugs on top, and we typically use it for our consolidation, maybe on a periodic basis. So actually, the view the business has of finance is, well, we're actually operating in the dark. That's a little bit scary. The next one, mediation. So what do we mean by mediation? So the closed process will no longer exist. So guess what? We can actually be at work 21.25 days a month. Okay? All right, not just for those couple of days it takes us to close. So I just want to give you what the leading practice for a closed process is today. What we call 2, 5, and 7. 2 days for month end, 5 days for period end, 7 days for year end. People go, I can do that. Next question I ask is, what's the effort that it takes to do it? Lots of overtime. Sometimes you have to bring in some extra, sort of capacity. Okay? So if we go 2, 5, and 7 with low effort, and then the kicker to this is no post adjustments. Finance goes, oh no, sorry, can't do that. That's impossible. I can't live without a period 13. Right? Okay, imagine the world where the closed process no longer exists. What you see is what you get real time, all the time. That's where finance is going. That's where data and systems are going today. So for those of us who are kind of close to the cloud computing and the cloud, okay, that's what these cloud systems, new age systems are doing today. Online, real time, as you see it, as you get it. That's it. Quite interesting. So automatically that's going to shift the paradigm around how we talk to our customers and how we support the business. Okay. Real-time auditing. Imagine that. Thank goodness I'm no longer an auditor. Thank goodness. Imagine how that impacts the profession as an example. But think of the value add in your business. You can trust that information all the time. Far too often, we as finance people are called to reperform or recheck. And so what's our greatest tool we have at our disposal? Excel spreadsheets. And if we're quite clever, we've even got some macros embedded in those, right? So actually, all the investment we make in significant IT systems today is for naught, because we hardly even use them. We use them as a record of account, right? To actually collate some transactions. Where do we often report from? Excel. As finance people, we only take comfort when we reperform and we do it in our Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so often when we talk to finance functions, the first thing we do, we ask them, how often do you use Excel? And it's quite interesting. I get these surveys back. Man, it's like off the charts. We use Excel for this and this and this. And I go, I walk out the room again, hold my chest and go, my goodness gracious. We've got a problem. No wonder our business doesn't trust us. No wonder we don't trust ourselves. Okay, so we have the power in our hands not to actually perpetuate that. All right, so that's talking about mediation. The last one is connectivity. Interesting. So people think this is the pink and fluffy stuff. Okay, it's not. This is finance at the heart of the organization, steering the organization to success. Hand on the tiller with the information at my disposal. Making sure that I can connect the dots across what this organization actually needs to know and understand. Very, very different. This is not regulatory reporting we're talking about. And if you're still in that space, I'm sure you don't enjoy your job. Okay? Imagine where you're architecting the future, being quite innovative, stress testing how the business will work, and every 5 minutes someone's actually asking you, what next? That's cool. Okay, so that's a little bit about what we talk around the finance of the future, around those 4 dimensions. Very different to what we talk about today. Okay, so navigation, resilience, mediation, connectivity. Traditional roles and mindsets and skills obviously will be applied differently. And this is the segue into the new finance persona, okay, and the new finance skill sets. It's quite interesting. When we look, even when we recruit, obviously people coming through the accounting route, through psycha, obviously doing articles and so on, FDAs, whatever it might be. But actually, many CFOs of the future are actually being recruited from business schools. And you go, but how can you don't even have a finance degree. How's that possible? Right? We'd be going, no, not a chance. But actually, if you think of the CFO's role in the future against this backdrop, do you actually need to be that strong in the debits and credits? The ones and zeros are going to be taking care of that for you. It's going to be hard-coded. Very different. The business acumen of the individual that's going to fill that role in the future could be a little bit different to what we have today. Today, generally, we are quite conservative. The finance CFO and finance function of the future will be slightly less conservative. Quite interesting. Different mindset, different skill. I'll talk about a couple of those new roles and personas in a moment. So again, I've spoken about the new concepts. So again, people always say, well, where do I start? So that's great. If I buy in or opt in is the word we often use. So where do I start? It's a journey. Of course, it's a journey. Okay? And the journey often is, one, a mindset, and second, it's also about what information systems I have at my disposal. Okay? Where am I in that spectrum? So I always like to say, let's start with the end in mind. So if you're very clear around what that end state looks like, what we call the North Star view, you have an aspiration. Already, it's a whole lot easier to start to reverse engineer what is that you're going to do. Because it's complex. Of course, it's complex. Why is it complex? So the box and wires is easy, as I call it, right? The technology. The process, fairly standard going forward. We see that in terms of blueprints and model companies and various ERPs today. What's the prime complication that we have when we face change? Once we've got the right mindset, what's the biggest thing? Us, people. We don't like change. Okay, so that's why the journey to transforming the finance organization is quite long and complex. It's not about the technology, it's not about the process, it's the people issues we need to deal with. And the first thing is, man, do I have a job? That's the first question I often get asked when we talk to a finance function. Do I have a job in the next 10 years? What is it going to look like? We'll talk about that in a moment. So if you're not clear around what the end state's going to look like, it's going to be very difficult to forge ahead. So we talk about modern finance. The modern finance function of the future. And again, this is not a future far, far away, by the way. This is a future that's actually now. And we see how finance is changing daily based on the organizations we work with. So can you imagine the world where technology is no longer the excuse? No excuse. Can't hide behind that. People are discomfort, okay? And actually the discomfort is exacerbated by a misunderstanding of what digital actually means. That's why I started with the way I interpret digital. Okay. Digital's cool, by the way. Imagine the ones and zeros, what I call the ones and zeros doing the heavy lifting. That's great. That's your workforce. That's your your electronic workforce going forward. You own the high ground and the intellect that those ones and zeros can't produce. Okay, so some of the easy things to think about today. We talk about desktop analytics. Often we speak to finance functions, we ask them where they are in that spectrum. Don't know, haven't even thought about it. It's an IT issue. Next thing, we ask about robotics, process automation. No, can't do that. Never heard of it. Oh, that happens in a manufacturing process. So it's things that put the cars together. No. RPA and robotic process automation in finance today is probably the most pervasive area where RPA is actually having a major impact. I'll talk about that in a moment. Digital Transformation Office to coordinate the various initiatives that we're running. No, that's an HR problem. No, it's not. It's a finance thing, right? We are building the operating model of the future. We have to make sure we know exactly where we're going. So that transformation office better sit in finance. Machine learning, okay, that we know. We talk about AI, MI, augmented reality, all these sorts of things. This is where we're going. We have to adopt this. We have to understand it. We have to actually forge our journey and make sure this doesn't get done to us, but actually part of it, and we actually ride that wave. Cognitive analytics. This is the future world of finance. Okay, so if you have that as a North Star, then you start to say, well, what is it? What do we need to start to look at as the building blocks? Well, I've got 4 or 5 things to think about. First of all, we need to adopt business change. We've got to understand that it's real. Okay, we've got to be serious about it. That's the first. I'm not going to read through all the text. The next thing is, we've got to understand our data. We've got to understand the BI standards that we have. Because data is crucial to how we'll operate. That is what we're going to use to make informed decisions. Decisions real time and on the fly. In a paradigm where organizations don't have a reference point. It's almost like a bit of a glass ball thing, right? Who in finance likes to look in a glass ball? No, because we're conservative, right? We are too scared to tell someone and it's wrong. Why? Because we're worried about the bars that'll appear in front of our face, right? We'll be up in jail. Sure, okay. Right, shared activities. Shared activities, shared services is not new. It's been around since the 1950s, 1960s. The trend in South Africa was, the rest of the world will do it. We're not so worried about it. Those that did kind of went offshore. They typically went labor arbitrage, whatever it might be. What we're seeing today, many organizations are actually considering bringing what they had outsourced back in-house, which we call captive. But here's the kicker. When they bring it back, they don't bring it back with that headcount that was sitting in an outsourced service provider. Because the first thing they do is they say, how much of this is actually transactional, manual? Let me employ an electronic workforce for this. So generally when they bring it back, it's not even coming back in the same form that it currently exists on the outsourced deal. That's very interesting. Okay? This is where you get scale of benefit, obviously eradicate the duplication and so on. And the other thing, which is obviously top of everyone's mind today, is cloud. How do I use cloud more effectively? Okay, how do I use the leading edge technologies and the connectors to that to allow me to drive that efficiency at the speed at which I've never been able to do before? Very interesting. So then if you start to look at this journey, we call it a 5-point journey. It sounds very simple. And that's the next thing we always talk about. When you look into your finance vision, your finance strategy, make sure it is simple and easy to understand and articulate. Why? Because the journey itself is complex. Don't have a complex plan. Okay. So here's the scary stuff. I like to do this every now and then, scare some people, just to kind of remind ourselves as to why we should do this. So if we do not do this, finance function of the future will be irrelevant. That is for sure. I think if we had to all do a little straw poll internally and kind of, kind of look at it from a truthful perspective, we'd probably say, yeah, if we do not change the way we work, we'll be irrelevant. It'll get done to us. The ones and zeros are around the corner. Okay, so what does we do? So first of all, let's just frighten ourselves just a little bit. So let's go back to finance quickly. Okay, I don't expect you can read all those, but these are typically the things that impact finance today. Quite unusual, right? There's things like regulation, there's data, there's different operating models, business, new entrants, new business that today are are kind of being incubated that they've never existed in the past. So you think of all of these things, right? Accelerated mergers and acquisitions, customer-driven strategies, the Spotify model, all these sorts of things. There's one term there that I think frightens finance people generally. And the question is, are you okay to admit it? So if I had to ask the audience today, for those of you that can see, what would you say is one of the biggest items on there? Is it unstructured data? What is it that worries us the most? What's the elephant in the room, as I call it? There it is. Radical automation. And the reason why it is something that finance is very scared of is because typically when you look across the finance function, we've got a lot of data capturers. We not really have finance accountants. A lot of people that actually spend their days doing data capture. That's why you get the question, what's my job going to look like? Am I going to be here? Today, we have kids, as I call them, that come out of school, right, that have never worked a day in their life, ever. They might have played on the internet, they might be the greatest at Fortnite, whatever it might be, all this latest trend stuff. They will code a robot when they get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning. By 5:30 in the afternoon, someone who's been doing that job for the last 15 years is out of a job. Like that. This is a kid who has no understanding of business concepts, no understanding of the past, no understanding of the future. But someone that can build some code very quickly to automate a process which today is highly manual. They've put someone out of a job without even thinking about it. And that's very real. It's very real. That is the elephant in the room for finance. Okay, so when we talk to CFOs and CEOs, over a third of them say that the digital revolution and how to integrate is one of their key concerns. They don't know how to do it. They don't know where to start. It almost feels like there's this massive thing that's bearing down on them, and they don't know where to start. So generally what you do, you put your head in the sand and hopefully it goes over your head, right? Okay, that ain't going to happen. So that's the scary stuff. Today, 45% of finance processes are automatable right now. That is scary. So if you had to almost sort of extrapolate that to your finance function, you could be going, do I lose 45% of my workforce? Not necessarily. Okay. If you only look at it from that way, you're kind of doomed to fail and it's going to be a disaster. You're not even going to get anyone on this journey. All right. That's the fact. In fact, I don't expect you to be able to read this, but this is just to remind myself. There are two technologies, the two most pervasive technologies that are impacting finance today in the next 3 years is RPA, robotic process automation. Okay? We're going to see that for the next 5 years. After that, which is the next grey circle, the darker grey, okay, is machine learning and AI. So this wave will continue. It's going to continue, and it's actually going to ramp up. So this is going to be what we have to deal with and how we have to understand how we configure the finance operating model moving forward. So again, just another little stat. 56%, okay, so almost close to 2/3, right, of finance CFOs have 4 things that keep them up at night. And this is not the traditional stuff, by the way. This is the stuff that they're worrying about for the future. My staff workload, my resistance to change, my talent management, and my digital fitness and adequacy. It's quite interesting. So a couple of years ago, when we used to talk to finance functions, what we'd always ask is, when last did you do training on IFRS? Just as an example. And you might get 1 or 2 people going, no, we kind of did a bit of an update recently. My answer to them always was, imagine if you got into the plane and the pilot said, listen, the last time I looked at the how-to manual and did a training course was when I qualified 40 years ago. What would you be grabbing for? That parachute. Right? It's the same thing. Okay. So actually, finance generally have said, well, it's an HR problem. No, I mean, this is the rules of the game. We need to understand this stuff. This is exacerbated further by how things are actually going to happen in a future digital economy. What does that mean? We hear these concepts, blockchain. Blockchain, what's blockchain? Right? AI, what's that? Machine learning, augmented reality. Yeah. These are all the things that are impacting finance. Interesting. Okay, so generally those are the top 4 topics that we actually face. And I often ask myself, what is the biggest change inhibitor? Like I say, it's not the box and wires. It's not the process, right? Yet we spend a lot of time re-engineering the process. But actually, there's so many standard processes today. In fact, a lot of the finance processes are standard. I think we'd all agree with that. If you're going to pay an invoice, you're going to pay an invoice, right? Okay, as an example. But where the complication comes is in the operational components of the business, which are often seen as part of finance, and they're not. So if you actually decouple that, if you look at a typical finance process, pretty stock standard, quite easy to do. Okay, so we can't hide behind that. All of a sudden now we stand there exposed again, people. Okay, it's our inability, okay, as the inhibitors to around how we need to change. Okay, so here's how finance looks today. The scary thing is the next generation finance function will be 50% of what it is today. That is scary. That is scary. Why? Well, some of it's actually a consequence of the belt tightening we've done over the last couple of years, right? We've had to sort of, downsize our finance functions, outsource this, whatever it might be. Think of all the things we've deployed to become more fit for purpose, or actually it wasn't really fit for purpose, it was actually cheaper, right? Normally what happens when you get cheap? You get nasty, as we call it, right? Okay, so we don't talk about cheaper finance functions, we talk about finance functions which are more value add. And in fact, the roles that we see in finance going forward will be roles that you can pay a whole lot more money for. So guess what, as finance people, hey man, we're going to earn a whole more money. But you're going to earn money in the things that add value. The things that don't add value, the organization's not going to pay for. Just remember that. Okay, so typically, finance today, when we look at it, the insight role, okay? So that's where we are looking forward, providing insight decision support. Today, finance functions typically spend less than 25% of their time doing that. And they don't even do it consistently. That's today. Okay? We spend about 2/3 of our time in the transactional stuff. Okay, transactional processing, all our typical finance processes. Big, fat, hairy, as we call it. We spend probably about 15% of our time in the control space. Okay? Generally, when people look at us, rear view focus, disparate processes, systems, manual controls, low integration, and again, very traditional operating models, quite hierarchical. Okay? It's quite interesting. So if you've got 7 bands in your organization, 7 layers in finance, you can have 7 people. Doesn't matter if they've only got a one-to-one reporting relationship. Okay. So we say, well, that's an HR problem. No, it's not. It's a finance problem. Right, so let's look at the finance of the future. So firstly, it's a whole lot smaller. But look where the emphasis has gone. We flipped what we call the triangle on its head. Because this is where people see the value of finance, in the insight role, where we traditionally are one of the weakest right now. So everything we do around our operating model, everything around the journey, has to be focused on that. How do you provide insight? How do you create value? That's going to create our relevance. That's what's going to keep us here. That's important. So that's the future look of finance. Small on purpose. How are we going to get there? Sure. We're going to be leveraging all sorts of things that play today. Analytics, process mining, cloud, blockchain, robotics. So here, we're going to move more to the interpretational, commercial, business acumen, as I mentioned earlier. Stress testing the future. How often do we as finance stress test the future? Doing the budget is not a stress test. Investments and divestitures. Many organizations have grown by acquisition. Okay, when you see a downturn in the economy, what's the first thing you start to go look at? All the stuff I've got, is it worth? Who's going to do that? Finance should be actually part of that. Finance should be predicting what that future shape of that organization should look like. Who else is going to do it? IT's not going to do it. HR's not going to do it. Okay, Ops certainly ain't going to do it because like turkey's voting for Christmas, right? Okay, all right. So finance has to be at that leading edge. So for those of you who do follow kind of technology and where the world of digital is going, we kind of refer to the essential 8 of technologies going forward. And all of these will actually have an impact on finance, 3 of which are the most pervasive today. Okay, so that is AI, robotic process automation, and data mining. Those are going to be the 3 that are going to influence and impact us the most. So it's almost like an Alice in Wonderland thing. So if I don't know where I go, there's a good chance I'm going to end up anywhere. Do I like what anywhere looks like? Don't know. So I better have a view around what it looks like. So what we do is we often ask finance functions, again, we ask CFOs, well, if you kind of have opted in and you understand this digital new way of working, this digital age, and so on, where would you see yourself on the spectrum of how you would interpret what we call digital. Now remember that the sort of Grant's view of digital is kind of all-encompassing, right? Okay, and it's certainly not necessarily owned only by IT. So we ask these questions, okay? Digital reflects, or it's a statement. We ask them to please kind of record where they see themselves. So digital reflects our unified approach to business, customer, employee. It goes beyond tech. It refers to everything we're doing and all the investments we're making. It refers to efforts in a specific area, or it is synonymous with IT. And we kind of ask finance functions to kind of gauge themselves on that, on a bit of a paradigm sort of model. And this is where many finance functions and CFOs that answer this will tell you this. We actually see ourselves as a modernizer. Okay? And you'll see that actually finance also looks at themselves as an efficiency seeker. Why? Because traditionally we've done that. We've always been looking for efficiencies. And in fact, we've had that beaten into us over the last 15 to 20 years. Be more efficient. Okay? So we're always going to have that view, and generally finance will be looking to drive efficiency, of course. And the first thing is going to do it in your own house, so you don't live in a glass house and you can then throw stones at operations, ask them why they're not so efficient, right? Okay. So many CFOs have to fix their house first before they can actually move to the next side of the business and actually help them with that area. The other one is redefiners. Of course, finance has to be a redefiner. So generally when we look at, again, when we talk to CFOs, again, 2,500 across the globe on an annual basis, this is what they're telling us. They're telling us we actually see ourselves as a modernizer. So the question is, if I'm a modernizer, what are your responsibilities? What are you going to do? How are you going to do this? Okay, what's your strategy? Okay. So we're not saying finance needs to be the next Google or the next, Amazon. No, right? Obviously, it's a maturity curve. The question is, what do I need to do, how, when, and where? So it's against that backdrop. Again, as I said, if the box and wires are simple, process is pretty much standard, how do I energize my people? Well, you energize your people around telling them what their future jobs will start to look like. Okay, it's a new paradigm. I've just put down just a couple for today. And some of these may exist in your organization. Some of them might be a reflection of something similar. These are all new. And there are others today that don't even exist that will continue to grow. So we talk about the analytics and value manager. Interesting. Right? We talk about the business growth partner. We talk about the digital accountant. So yes, of course, we've still got accountants. Great, they're just digital. We talk about the global process owner. The compliance and risk manager. That's not internal audit, by the way. Okay, we talk about the data scientist. These are the inquisitive people that are looking at unstructured data and actually building and looking for the patterns that actually allow you to help navigate and future-proof that future. This sits in finance. The digital engineer. Again, the transformation lead. These are just a few of what those finance roles in the future are going to look like. These are really, really exciting. Okay? These are the things that we've got to start to think about around how we bring the next generation of finance professionals through. So I often get this thing, so I'm energized. Okay, I want to opt in, where do I start? It kind of almost feels a bit obvious, right? But it's not. So if we say the backdrop is that we're a modernizer, we believe there's a 7-point plan that you should adopt, or a 7-point agenda, and we call this the magic 7. And when I show it to you, it's going to look so obvious. But sometimes that's the ease of actually why. And that's why I say don't make a strategy overcomplicated. Keep it simple. First one, people. Understand how your operating model of the future will need to look across 2 dimensions. What does my digital finance workforce look like? And how do I modernize and the modern finance workplace, as we call it? Who says that finance people have to be at the office 8 hours a day or 12 hours a day? Who says they have to be in a head office? Okay, think about that. So the technologies we have today are automatically impacting the way we will actually interact and where we'll be when we do it. Remember the anecdotal thing I talked about a little bit earlier? The CFO, sort of as they're sipping their cappuccino, right? They could be at a cafe, interacting with the various technologies they need to be able to make an informed decision or to take the next step, not necessarily in the office. That's the first thing. Second thing is process. The 3 things in here are intelligent automation, predictive enterprise risk, and pre-configured cloud ERPs. If you do not have a strategy around these 3, you're going to struggle to get your process harmonization right. Lastly, performance. So by implication, what I'm telling you here is if you don't look at finance from a process, from a people, and from a performance perspective, you're not going to get the 7 things right. So 2 things connected to that: connected self-service data, and again, assisted insights and performance. Gone are the days where the business is going to wait for finance to give them a report around how I'm doing. By that point, my family's dead, right? And your customers or your competitors have already told you and eaten your lunch. Okay, so we have, and this is always where the power of finance sat, right? The report's in my drawer, it's on my desktop, my ivory tower. You can't live like that. The world, as we know it, is changing, and therefore we need to be able to adopt the way to work. We need to give the organization the ability to have insight as to how performance work. We'll configure that obviously with them. Okay, so if once you establish a future vision, decided on the culture, and subscribe to this, I call it the 3 Ps: people, process, performance, against the backdrop of what I call the magic 7. So if anyone wants to take a photograph, this is the one to take a photograph of. Okay, all right. So, got a few minutes. Just a quick straw poll. I'm not interested in what your answer is unless you really want to tell me, and you're not allowed to crib from the person next to you. You'll see on the back of the piece of paper that was handed out, there's a couple of dimensions. And ask a couple of questions. Just mark yourself, just for your own sort of point of reference. Okay. Try to be as honest with yourself as possible. So the first one is around intelligent automation. These are the questions. Hopefully we can read. I'll read out. What I'm going to do is I'll read out the A, I'll read out the middle, and I'll read out the end. So A, starting. Your organization has disparate, non-standard finance process models that vary by region, segment, or market with significant manual processing. So if that kind of sounds like where you are, okay, or you know a friend who has that problem, as we like to say sometimes, mark yourself as A. If you're developing, which is a C, your organization has initiated some global process owners, there is some standardization, you've got started desktop automation RPAs, you've got some pilots in process, you've got some logic-driven software automation. Does that sound like a bit of a stretch, right? That's, well, kind of, yeah, I'm developing. Right. If I'm a visionary, this is what it sounds like. Your organization has incorporated intelligent automation, such as machine learning and AI. You've got automated process execution, and you introduce cognitive intelligence and process monitoring. Man, that is like future stuff, right? So anyway, you can kind of look at where you might sit on that spectrum. Okay, so that's in terms of intelligent automation. Finance operating models. This is the people this is the people part, right? How we organize ourselves. Let's quickly see how we score here. Starting. Your organization is based on a classic finance setup by function, FP&A, tax, your typical sort of stuff, without competence models, career paths within each function. Or I'm developing, my organization started to develop an integrated career paths. We're business relevant, have a lot of business acumen entwined in what we do. That's kind of developing. And then visionary, you have embedded finance function, digital finance culture based on values such as agility, sharing risk, taking failure, acceptance, and so on. So you can kind of look at where you might score there. The reason why we do these is because it actually just gives you a starting point to say, well, where do I start? Put a peg in the ground. Connected core and self-service. Generally, finance functions are quite low on the spectrum here. Why? Because they're sitting on Excel spreadsheets. We don't really share them with anyone. We share them with someone if they ask. And if they ask, we might get it to them in 30 days' time. Okay? So A, multiple and or fragmented ERPs and EPM platforms. EPM, enterprise performance management, planning, budgeting, forecasting, consolidation, etc. Support ongoing business and finance operations. I'm developing, I've got cloud-based processes and or reporting platforms. I've developed a longer-term digital ERP strategy and a roadmap. Or I'm like a really visionary and I have a strong cloud infrastructure, finance governance, deployed in the cloud, etc., with digitization tool sets. Okay, workforce of the future. Where are we here? So A, limited understanding of leading practice and future finance trends, including the impact of future finance. Hopefully today we've all got that, so we could mark that definitely, right? Okay. I'm developing, I've assessed the impact of the next generation finance workforce and its capabilities, and I've started to develop some learning paths and skill set requirements around that. I haven't just left it to HR. Or I've actually, my hiring plans today, my job descriptions are already in place, and I'm already hiring against that future operating model. And then lastly, on the assisted intelligence and performance management, your organization is reporting typically static analysis, reports, PDF spreadsheets, based on highly structured data with manual integration and heterogeneous cross-functional collaboration. Developing your organization adopts flexible reporting using scenarios, limited drill down possibilities, mainly based on financial data. Visionary, you have implemented customer-centric, individualized reporting based on automated usage analysis, consistent setup of data, and you've got a driver analysis, just as an example. So generally, this is some scary stuff. And again, it doesn't have to sort of scare you to a standstill. It's more about saying, what's the room for improvement? What's that white space that I can actually enter into? And this is the cool stuff of finance. Okay. So very quickly, again, just to remind ourselves, if we're not even considering these 5 things, I'm going to tell you about these 5 things, because if you're not, someone else is eating your lunch. Okay. And people that are doing this, you're going to lose your finance workforce too. So organizations that are doing this, your finance people that are sitting in your finance function today are going to see another finance function more attractive than your own. So guess what? You're going to be cannibalized irrespective of your competitor. So number 1, 27% of organizations today are already looking at robotic process automation. If you're not, you've got to ask yourself why. Data and process analytics. Almost half of the people we talk to, both on our global CEO survey and our CFO survey annually, already, half of the people we talk to are already looking at this. Cloud solutions, same thing. Sustainable cost management. If we're not driving cost in the business, okay, so again, first thing is, well, finance is what we ask you to do anyway, right? Someone's eating your lunch. At least a third of organizations today are looking at how they drive sustainable cost. And this is not just about slash and burn and see what I can do. This is about future operating models. How can I make them more efficient, more value add? And then lastly, target operating model. If you haven't looked at your target operating model, or your operating model in finance today, and you haven't changed it over the last 3 to 5 years, I can tell you now the world has since moved on. Okay. So often question is, well, it's quite a journey. There's a lot of stuff to be done. So what is the prize? If I get this thing right, okay, I call it the 3 by 5. So imagine if we had to step back from ourselves and say, what would we like this architect or this future CFO as a persona to actually look like? Okay, and now you can take some more photos if you want. This is what we call the 3 by 5. So the first thing is the anatomy of the future relevant CFO in the age of digital against the backdrop of navigation, mediation, resilience, and connectivity, where the hypothesis is that 80% of finance transactional work will be automated. Imagine that world. So what's your relevance? Here's the design principles you want to check yourself against. Number 1, a value partner. I will be a value partner if I can do these 5 things. And by the way, I can only count to 5. You'll see everything I always talk about has only got 5 things in it. Okay? So number 1, I can turn insight into action. It's all very well having insight, but I don't do anything about it. Okay? I work beyond the traditional scorekeeper and commentator mindset. Thirdly, I add value all day, every day. Not only when there's a board meeting, okay, or the auditors are about to arrive. I'm focused beyond driving efficiency to creating agility. So I've moved out of the paradigm of trying to be as efficient as possible, because you're going to get to a point where you can be no more efficient. But how agile am I now? Okay, and again, a future paradigm where there is no reference model. And the last thing for me here, I think is very important as a CFO, to be a trusted value partner. I actually am my own shareholder activist. I'm looking at this from the eyes of a future investor. That is a valuable CFO or finance function, if you call that as the persona. Okay, so that's the 1. That's the first thing, a value partner. Those are the 5 things that we would mark yourself against in terms of design principles of what this future would look like. Number 2, a visionary who has organized themselves for a modern way of working, not trying to out-robot the robots and leveraging digital to its fullest. So let me just stop here for a moment. If we think that the robots we build with the high intelligence we have are we're going to ever be faster than them, no, we won't be. Why? Because we've built them to be that way. So for those that are chasing, okay, the ability to be faster than a robot, don't chase that dream. It'll always be faster than you, because we've built it to be that way. Okay, all right. We've architected it like that. So don't worry about that. Do not stop worrying about the ones and zeros, as we call it. Rather leverage that to its fullest and actually move into a different paradigm. So here are the 5 things here. The ones and zeros are doing the heavy lifting and the back office grind. So remember the anecdotal thing I spoke about earlier, right? This stuff's happening 24/7. Not only when finance is at work, during working hours. Top talent is focused on predictive analysis and insights. That's where you get people highly energized and engaged. Not crunching numbers, not processing accounts payable invoices, not doing bank reconciliations, not doing adjustment journals, and etc., etc. Okay. Thirdly, owns the digital briefcase. Grant, what do you mean by the digital briefcase? What is this thing? Okay, imagine the virtual boardroom, all right? And it's pity we couldn't show that video, where you can actually move stuff around. And straight away, you've got the triggers, and you can see the scenario impact of that. That's what I talk about the digital boardroom. Now, we see this in the Hollywood movies. That world is very close by. Okay, there's many ERP systems today that already have those digital dashboards kind of in them, okay? Part of the AI analytics piece, where you can actually do scenario modeling and you can play with that. So what we're saying is the future CFO or the finance persona must own that digital briefcase. Why? Because you're going to architect what needs to be inside that digital briefcase. Okay? Fourthly, might be a little bit controversial. That's why I always ask if there's any IT people in the room. Having the chief data officer, right, and the chief analytics officer reporting to the CFO. That goes back to our original thing, who owns your data, not IT. And lastly, imagine this world. We all love Siri. Okay, so my boys, okay, they race motocross. So when we get back to the motocross track, the thing that they love to do is they ask Siri, please wash my motorbike. And Siri's answer is, it's not in my job description. Anyway, so imagine the day when you can ask Siri for the CFO, what is it you need to know, how, when, and where, and Siri will be able to tell you. Imagine that. Let's call it Siri, right? Imagine that day. That day is not far away. Think about how software and through voice recognition, you'll be able to do that. Remember in that anecdotal thing I showed a bit earlier? All right? And then the last one. Available 24/7. I had someone ask me, doesn't mean I've got to work. Jeez, man, but we overworked as it is. No, you're available 24/7 because finance is happening 24/7, right? Great. So against that backdrop, real-time management dashboards and visualization optics. Single version of the truth and real-time financial consolidation. Financial consolidation will no longer be an event. Imagine that. Wow, that's so cool. Okay? Cross-functional data analytics, self-service capability, and harnessing insights. I want to leave you with this. When you can tick that against what I call the 3x5, you know you're a finance function or a CFO of the future and you're future relevant. My name is Searle, and I'm a partner at PwC. And I'd like to thank you for your attention.